Zach, it's time once again to remember the true meaning of Christmas. That's right, it's to make sequels to successful films. And no film was more successful in 1988 than Die Hard, leading to 1990's Die Hard 2, Die Harder, directed by Renny Harlin. Die Hard 2 is adapted from Walter Wager's 1987 novel 58 Minutes. The film takes place in a not explicitly stated date in the week leading to Christmas, and not directly on Christmas Eve as the original Die Hard was. However, the holiday setting is felt much more in this East Coast setting, as the snow plays a very prominent part in much of this film, whose themes have moved from bank robberies to America's interference in the internal affairs of Central American nations. The film is a fantastic follow-up to the original, and is only overshadowed by the original because it is effectively the brand generic of one man against all odds. The film cold opens, no pun intended, in front of a snowy airport terminal, which we will later learn is the Washington Dulles International Airport. John McClane, once again played by Bruce Willis, attempts to convince an airport police officer to not tow his mother-in-law's Oldsmobile, which fails spectacularly. We are shown tracking shots of the airport as well as a nearby hotel. An unknown, naked, muscular man played by William Sadler is shown doing a workout regimen while a news story plays on the television. A General Esperanza, played by Franco Nero, is being extradited from the fictional nation of Valverde to the United States for cocaine trafficking charges. The naked man is also shown on the television interacting with this general while wearing a U.S. Army officer uniform. Newscasts strewn throughout the opening minutes of the film indicate that the general is being flown to the airport in question rather than a military airfield. He is shown leaving his room along with many other men, all wearing winter outfits, clean-cut hair, and wrapped gifts. John McClane answers a message on his pager and calls the number, getting his wife, Holly McClane, played once again by Bonnie Bedelia, calling from her airplane. She evidently had to remain behind in LA for a few extra days. They make plans for after she arrives. Holly also speaks with her seatmate, who proudly shows off a taser she has in her purse. Pre-9/11 air travel was wild. McClane and the unknown man bump into each other. They vaguely recognize each other but aren't sure why. They tell each other they've been on television a lot. The unknown man is more concerned with McClane than McClane is with the unknown man. A municipal utility crew gains entry to a church near the airport. The caretaker of the church laments the looming demise of the church, saying that a piece of him is dying along with it. The utility worker agrees with him and shoots him dead with a suppressed handgun. One of the men activates a radio, indicating the clubhouse is open. Several of the men gather near a hotel bar and discuss their assignments. The only thing that seems to be going wrong is some sort of last-second roster change. John is also there, still waiting for his wife's arrival. He notices the gathered men and by chance witnesses that one of them is armed. McClane tries to report the firearm to a pair of gathered police officers, but upon noticing one of the men is the same who impounded his car, he gives up. Local television news reporter Samantha Coleman, played by Sheila McCarthy, has been doing news reports from the airport. She notices the unknown man and addresses him as Colonel Stewart, who declines her request for an interview. McClane tracks one of the men who was at the hotel bar and observes him enter a restricted area. Unable to reach the door in time, McClane identifies himself as a police officer to an employee to gain entry, also telling the employee to retrieve backup. The restricted area is a baggage terminal in the airport. McClane observes the men fussing with some kind of electrical equipment. He identifies himself as a police officer and demands to see identification. The men respond with gunfire, and McClane responds in kind. The film is going out of its way to highlight that the men are carrying Glock handguns. The Glock, while ubiquitous today, was considered a higher trim, almost luxury handgun at the film's release, similar to the Desert Eagle. During the firefight, McClane loses his Beretta. He is able to kill one of the men as backup eventually arrives. While attempting to pursue the other suspect, the police confuse McClane for the intruder and stop him, as his badge is apparently on its way to Cleveland. An angry man on Holly's plane will be immediately recognized by fans of the first film and eventually revealed to be Richard Thornburg, played once again by William Atherton. The reporter is upset that he does not have his first-class seat, and his complaints fall on deaf ears as the flight attendants recount trashy news pieces about air travel that he has spearheaded. He sees Holly near his replacement seat and reacts with horror, indicating that they are violating a restraining order he has against her. Holly assaulted him at the end of the previous film, having punched him in the jaw due to his efforts to interview Holly's children while she was held hostage at Nakatomi Plaza. The flight attendants offer Holly bottomless champagne. The assailant who fled the airport arrives at the church, which is now crawling with men. He reports in to Colonel Stewart and reports that while his partner is dead, their mission was a success. Stewart threatens to execute the man if there are any further failures. McClane is reunited with his badge and sidearm. He is horrified that the luggage terminal is not being treated as a crime scene. He demands to be taken to the captain in charge. Chief Carmine Lorenzo, played by NYPD Blue's Dennis Franz, berates McClane in prototypical police captain berating cop who's definitely onto something but the plot says he has to be against it form. Lorenzo knows of McClane's efforts in the previous film and is giving him no professional courtesy over it. He won't shut the luggage area down because it's an airport in the week before Christmas, over what he's convinced is luggage thieves. McClane mentions the assailants were carrying Glock handguns and the highly expensive, unusual nature of that, which Lorenzo ignores. A military aircraft is shown having its fighter escorts abandon it. The plane is shown to be carrying General Esperanza, who is shackled. We are also shown the church again, which is now littered with computers and wires. They are eventually shown successfully tapping into airport controls, including radar and runway lights. McClane, thinking fast, steals paper and an ink pad from a terminal desk and fingerprints the dead assailant before he is taken to the morgue. He faxes the fingerprints to Sergeant Al Powell, once again played by Reginald Val Johnson. He identifies the assailant as a U.S. military advisor who apparently died 2 years ago in Honduras. Sam Coleman sees John McClane and introduces herself. McClane denies involvement in what happened in the luggage area. We are shown the air traffic control tower of the airport. The director of the tower, Ed Trudeau, played by future United States Senator Fred Dalton Thompson, discusses the deteriorating weather situation with his subordinate Leslie Barnes, played by Art Evans, as well as with Lorenzo. Other airports in the region are shutting down and sending their flights to Washington Dulles. McClane gains entry to the air traffic control tower and pleads with Trudeau to take his concerns seriously. McClane shows him the dossier of the deceased assailant. Trudeau, convinced, orders Lorenzo to have all his shift commanders report in. They don't have to speculate long on what professional mercenaries would want with an airport as alarms go off and the runway lights suddenly go dead. Their efforts to resuscitate their systems fail. Trudeau orders his staff to tell all airplanes out of range of the airport to divert to backup airports, and that any within their range are now to enter holding patterns. He also demands this information remain need to know, but also informs his staff that they have approximately 2 hours before the planes in the air run out of fuel, which seems like enough time for them to just divert to other airports like Baltimore, Philadelphia, Raleigh-Durham, but then that would kill all the tension in the film. Contacting over the FAA hotline, Colonel Stewart makes contact without naming himself. He relays his demands that the approaching cargo jet, call sign Foreign Military 1, land on a runway of his designation away from the airport, as well as a 747, fully fueled and made available to him. He also notifies them that he is cutting their contact off with the other airplanes in the next few minutes. If they attempt to restore their systems, he threatens severe penalties. McClane and Lorenzo argue about Lorenzo's sluggish response time while Barnes discusses fallback options with his staff, including an under-construction annex with all the hardware they'd need to transmit, which McClane partially overhears. Lorenzo cites FAA regulations to evict McClane from the tower, and the unplanned arrival of Sam Coleman expedites this. McClane gives Coleman another cold reception. She remarks that she got the same response from Colonel Stewart, which causes McClane to realize he's the leader of the terrorists. McClane escapes the control tower elevator by going out the top, remarking that he's done this before. Barnes convinces Trudeau of his plan to use the annex skywalk. Lorenzo sends his SWAT team with him, remarking that anything they can think of, the terrorists could think of too, which is just so close to realizing what's going to happen but doesn't quite make the connection. Trudeau alerts the incoming aircraft of the extended delay due to equipment failure and, perhaps my favorite euphemism, an unforeseen human factor. The boards all change to indicate every incoming and outgoing flight is now delayed, making the civilians in the airport irate, but otherwise placated. While searching the underbelly of the airport to find the annex he heard about, McClane runs into airport custodian Marvin, played by Tom Bauer. Marvin shows McClane the annex on a map, and McClane realizes the design of it is such that it's prime for an ambush. Barnes and the SWAT team make it to the annex, which has several clean-cut maintenance workers all painting while having firearms nearby. One of the men turns off the moving walkway, and when the SWAT team leader asks what he looks like, one of the custodians, played by Robert Patrick, replies a sitting duck. With the SWAT team pinned down on the moving walkway and flanked at all sides, they eventually all go down, only taking a few terrorists with them in the process. Before the Not T-1000 can execute Barnes, McClane arrives and starts racking up kills in a dramatic sequence where one lone cop with a Beretta takes out what a fully loaded SWAT team could not. He regroups with Barnes, but before they can set up the antenna array, it explodes, having apparently been booby-trapped. McClane correctly surmises that the array was bait. The airport police no longer have a SWAT team, and the array is destroyed. McClane overhears a functioning walkie-talkie on a dead terrorist, which in actuality is the terrorist demanding a sitrep from a dead team that will not answer. McClane cannot understand the transmission, as it is encrypted with a 10-digit code he doesn't have. Colonel Stewart's men realize that their team was killed in the firefight, which was not part of the plan. As a result, Stewart contacts Dulles Tower and promises retribution. Lorenzo yelling at McClane over the party line causes Stewart to realize who McClane is. McClane questions Stewart's motives over the radio, with Stewart trying to rationalize his actions by stating that America cannot use men like Esperanza to fight the rise in world socialism and then leave him high and dry. Stewart then makes good on his threat. His men contact a store-brand British Airways flight that is low on fuel, but reconfigure the ILS landing system to make sea level minus 200 feet. Zach, I'm gonna actually this movie for a moment. This cannot actually happen. The short version is that sea level is programmed on the plane side, not the tower. So the event that is about to play out cannot happen in real life. This is little solace to the occupants of the flight, whose captain, played by Deep Space Nine's Cole Meany, are given doomed authorization to land by Colonel Stewart impersonating the tower. With the lights out and the blizzard in high intensity, they will not be able to see the ground. McClane tries in vain to alert the plane with lit torches, but like every Deep Space Nine episode centered around Chief O'Brien, it ends badly. The plane impacts the runway at a steep angle and explodes, killing everyone aboard. Stewart reiterates his demand for Foreign Military 1 to not be approached and his request for a 747 if they wish to avoid further loss of life. An exasperated Trudeau orders Barnes to find any means necessary for him to be capable of warning the planes still in the air that someone on the ground is impersonating them. He also tells a devastated McClane that the Army is sending a Special Forces team in response to the crisis. He also tells him that his wife's plane has 90 minutes of fuel left. Meanwhile, on board Hawley's plane, Thornburg notices the large amount of airplanes all visible in the holding pattern. He meets with his production assistant who has his radio and asks him to tune into the cockpit frequency. The men's curiosity is piqued when they hear nothing, only the outer marker beacon. It's like the tower isn't there. The Army Special Forces team arrives, led by Major Grant, played by John Amos. He and McClane have a tense greeting where it is revealed that Stewart served under Grant. Grant immediately takes command of the situation, locating the device the terrorists planted in the luggage area, which was tapping tower communications all night. McClane speaks to the platoon's communications man, who apparently was only transferred into the unit yesterday, and reiterates that there is no fast way to break the radio encryption of the terrorists. McClane is boxed out of the military response. Barnes and his tower staff discuss ideas. They've already warned several planes off that had phones installed that they could reach, but there's still 13 planes who don't know air traffic control has been compromised. A comment made in passing causes Barnes to realize they could have switched the outer marker beacon frequency to the tower and established one-way communication with the planes, which, the SWAT team and British Airways flight wish you'd thought of that earlier. Thornburg's production assistant realizes the outer marker beacon is now speaking. Barnes is relaying the entire situation to this point, which causes Thornburg's assistant to receive every detail as well, recorded on tape. Aboard Foreign Military 1, General Esperanza has escaped his shackles. The pilots of the plane argue with the impersonated tower's conflicting directions, but Esperanza threatens them at gunpoint to follow the commands. The co-pilot tries to wrestle the gun away, and in the struggle both pilots are killed. The plane's radio and windshield are destroyed in the process. Stewart frantically tries to contact the plane, but is shocked to hear Esperanza coming through his radio frequency instead, indicating that due to no cabin pressure and near zero visibility, he can only land on one particular runway. McClane meets with Marvin again, asking for any maps that could get him into the control tower. He overhears radio chatter and discovers a radio Marvin found in the luggage area that still has his decryption code entered. As a result, McClane gets the information he needs about which runway the plane is landing on and rushes towards it. Stewart's team also approaches the runway, carrying submachine guns with prominent red tape on the magazines. McClane gets there first and takes Esperanza hostage. A gunfight ensues when Stewart and his men arrive, and Esperanza is shot in the arm by McClane before he takes cover in the cockpit. McClane uses the plane's ejector seats to escape grenades thrown into the cockpit. Stewart and his men flee the area when the military approach the airplane. Back on Hawley's plane, they are continuing to run out of fuel. They put local TV on the airplane to placate the passengers. Thornburg, satisfied that he has enough information, steals one of the airplane's phones and hides in the lavatory, calling his news station demanding to be put on the air. McClane is berated by both Lorenzo and Grant, demanding he stop being a loose cannon on deck. McClane correctly points out that the terrorist leverage is gone because all the planes know now not to trust the phony air traffic control, and that they need to go on the offensive. Grant tells him he's the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time, to which McClane replies, "Story of my life." Barnes, also frustrated at being frozen out of the situation, tells McClane that because they were able to communicate with the plane over walkie-talkie, that they must be in a neighborhood adjacent to the airport. They both set off to try and locate the terrorist staging area. The situation remains tense in Hawley's airplane as passengers demand to know why the plane has not landed yet and question openly how much fuel is remaining. Barnes and McClane locate a possible location, noticing a church with sentries walking around. Unfortunately for McClane, as he approaches, Hawley calls his pager, setting it off. The beeping is enough for McClane to be attacked by the sentry. While they fight, Barnes calls Lorenzo and calls in the terrorist location. Grant immediately takes the address and orders his men to move out. An odd moment of dissonance plays out on the Army's troop truck when Grant says they have a situation, and all the men load magazines with blue tape on them into their rifles and lower their masks, while the oblivious radio man continues to monitor communications. McClane kills the sentry with an icicle through his eye socket just in time for the Army and airport police to arrive. Grant shoots down Lorenzo's attempt to berate McClane and orders Lorenzo's men to watch the street. As they approach the church, they set off a tripwire and alarms go off inside. Stewart demands a sitrep. One of his men report Army commandos are swarming the building. All the men begin unloading their red-taped submachine guns and replace them with blue-taped magazines. A firefight between the Army commandos and the terrorists breaks out. Stewart's remaining men place explosives in the church as he and his men get ready to evacuate. McClane observes them fleeing on snowmobiles and kills two of them, taking off in pursuit. Grant's men notice the explosives inside and order everybody out. Stewart's men realize they're being followed. McClane opens fire using the terrorist submachine gun and is perplexed that his usual top-notch aim seems to be off. The same cannot be said for the terrorists, who are now wielding guns with red magazines. McClane is forced to flee when he realizes he's outgunned and his snowmobile is destroyed in the process. A bewildered McClane can't understand how he didn't hit anybody. He pulls the magazine out of his gun and has an unseen realization. Stewart gets his confirmation from Dulles Tower that his plane is ready in a hangar. When he requests the ground crew to service the plane, Grant tells him to fix his own plane, refusing to provide him with more hostages. Grant orders Lorenzo's men back to the airport to guard it, as the Army prepares to move on the hangar. Air traffic control staff are unable to use the terrorist equipment to land the planes as explosives are still present and Stewart is believed to be holding the detonator. Grant's men rib on the new guy, discussing the Grenada conflict. He laments having not been with the unit at the time. Grant agrees, saying if he had, he wouldn't have to do this. This being defined as grabbing a knife and slicing new guy's throat. He activates his radio and calls Stewart, indicating he and his men are inbound. Depending on your level of genre savvy, this is either confirmation of what you suspected or a point-blank shot to the face. The terrorists and the Army unit have been working together the whole time. McClane, with Marvin's help, makes it to Lorenzo's office. McClane has realized the deception that has taken place and tries to convince Lorenzo that they're all working together. When Lorenzo refuses to believe him and threatens to place him under arrest, McClane pushes him backwards and opens fire. Every officer in the room is shocked to see that there isn't a single hole in Lorenzo or the wall behind him. McClane shows Lorenzo the blue-taped magazine loaded with blanks. As a gun safety note, please do not discharge a gun loaded with blanks at another individual, as any material left in the barrel could still be shot out. Lorenzo immediately orders all men recalled to the motor pool in full body armor in 5 minutes. "It's time to kick ass," he says with glee. At the same time, Richard Thornburg's report airs. Everyone in the air and all the civilians in the airport, they've been there the whole time, are now aware of the ongoing terrorist attack and panic, fleeing the airport. Holly realizes Thornburg is live on TV from wherever he is. Seeing her seatmate's purse unattended, she retrieves the taser, forces the lavatory door open, and uses the stun gun on him, ending his live report. McClane and Lorenzo take off in the lead car from the motor pool, but the panicked fleeing passengers cause an accident, effectively preventing the airport police from leaving their parking lot. McClane notices Sam Coleman and her news crew and rushes to them. He offers her an exclusive on the story in exchange for something. The Army unit reaches the hangar. They are greeted with jubilation in the prospect of vacation in paradise and begin to board the plane. McClane's demand is revealed to be Sam Coleman's news helicopter. The pilot refuses McClane's request to block the runway, as a 747 will destroy the helicopter easily. A new voice is heard over the airport frequency. Holly's plane can wait no longer and is going to attempt an emergency landing with no lights and no visibility. McClane settles for having the helicopter fly over top the airplane while the crew of Holly's plane begin crash procedures. McClane, improvising, jumps onto the port side wing of the 747. Noticing that the ailerons are moving as part of takeoff procedures, McClane jams the flap open with his jacket, which will prevent safe takeoff unless removed. Esperanza realizes McClane is out on the wing. Grant and Stewart go to take care of him, with the warning not to use guns as the wing is full of fuel. Grant goes onto the wing first and is jumped by McClane. Grant appears to have the upper hand until an arrogant Grant misjudges his opponent and begins to slide down the wing, eventually falling off and going through the intake of one of the engines. As he watches the demise of Grant, McClane notices an auxiliary fuel dump door and begins to fuss with it. Stewart jumps in next and overpowers McClane and is eventually successful in throwing him off the wing. Unfortunately for Stewart, McClane grabs the fuel release door on his way down. Oblivious, Stewart fixes the flap while the plane is dumping large amounts of fuel. A calm McClane exclaims the line the audience has waited all night to hear, "Yippee Ki Yay, motherfucker," and throws his lit cigarette lighter onto the trail of dumped fuel. The ignited fuel follows the trail all the way back to the plane, where it explodes in a sensational fireball, killing everyone on board. A jubilant McClane yells towards the sky, realizing that by igniting the dumped fuel and creating a long trail of fire, he has inadvertently created a set of landing lights for his wife's plane, which lands successfully with no casualties, as do the rest of the planes when they realize that they can do the same. Holly hears her husband's cries of her name as she gets off the plane. Both are finally reunited and embrace. Holly says she heard there were terrorists at the airport. John says he'd heard about that too. God damn it, Zach, this scene gets me every time. I must be getting old. Holly, as some of the fourth wall nod to the audience, openly asks how these sorts of things keep happening to them. Sam Coleman shows more restraint than Richard Thornburg would, leaving the McClanes alone to enjoy the reunification. Thornburg is seen getting his just desserts, having fallen on the ground and can't get up, and is berated by the original owner of the taser. Marvin greets John and Holly with his cart, saying he'll be damned if he has to clean this mess up. Lorenzo also arrives and confronts McClane. "Hey McClane! You get this parking ticket in front of my airport?" He tears up the ticket saying, "What the hell? It's Christmas." Vaughn Monroe's rendition of Let It Snow begins as the credits begin and the screen fades to black.